Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first talk about loneliness. A very uplifting topic for a Friday evening, I know. But at the same time, many people do feel lonely on Friday evenings because they feel like they're the only ones who are not as socially active and engaged as others. So my name is Luzia Heu. I am a loneliness researcher and also an assistant professor for interdisciplinary social sciences at Utrecht University. And today I would like to debunk a few myths about loneliness and misunderstandings about loneliness. But before I start, I would invite you to close your eyes and try to remember a situation, or also multiple situations, in which you felt lonely yourself. Of course, only if this doesn't trigger you all too much. So my first question is, did you feel lonely because you did not have enough social relationships? And did you feel lonely because you were alone too much? You can open your eyes again. So while some of you might say, yes, I did feel lonely because I was alone a lot and I didn't have enough or I didn't have enough social relationships, many of you might say, I did feel lonely, but actually my relationships at that point were quite good. And nevertheless, many lay people and also the media talk about loneliness as if the main problem of lonely people was that they are socially isolated. And in fact, does this work? In fact, it doesn't work. Can we go to the next slide? So in fact, it's not only lay people and the media who say that, but even organizations that try to reduce, it still doesn't work. Next, please. We don't see your slide. It's fine. No, that's fine. That's part of the program, but this doesn't work is not part of the program. Anyway, so even big organizations that aim to reduce loneliness, such as the World Health Organization, next one please, or also the US Public Health Service, often try to address loneliness and social isolation together. So this is why a first misunderstanding, next please, I would like to address here is that people who feel lonely are typically socially isolated. We even see that there are a lot of interventions actually that address loneliness in a one-size-fits-all intervention to increase social contact, which actually is a solution for social isolation, not necessarily for the feeling of loneliness. Because in fact, loneliness is a little bit similar to sadness. Loneliness can flow from many different causes. For instance, click, not feeling, it works now? Thanks, okay. So not feeling understood in one's relationships, facing problems or decisions, not fitting in with others or social norms, having just gone through a romantic breakup, having lost a close other, not finding a romantic partner, having had distant or cold parents in one's childhood, having a genetic disposition to feel lonely, etc., etc., etc. So there are many, many different reasons for feeling lonely, and social isolation or aloneness are two out of these many reasons. A second misunderstanding I would like to address is that loneliness is mostly a problem of old people. It's very related to the first misunderstanding. In fact, old people often are less mobile than younger age groups. They're often retired, so they spend more time alone. And that is why many people think that they feel lonelier. Indeed, research findings suggest that old people really report more loneliness than many other age groups, but young adults and adolescents often report as much loneliness as old people, and they are usually not very socially isolated. However, they go through a lot of life transitions. Often they move away maybe from the social context that they know. They might be too insecure yet to really authentically relate to other people. They might not feel very close to their parents anymore, but not have a very stable own social network yet. They have to make a lot of decisions, perhaps go through multiple breakups. Young adolescents and young adults also typically are a little bit more sensitive to social rejection and really want to fit in. So, in short, a lot of different reasons for feeling lonely at that age. Third myth, loneliness is mostly a problem in individualistic societies, and loneliness has massively increased over the last years. I present them together because the reasoning behind them is again quite similar. So people usually think that in societies and cultures where people spend a lot of time alone, for instance through modern technology, where many people live alone, where old people typically live away from their families, should be more likely to feel lonely. So what we see is then newspaper headlines such as how loneliness became an epidemic, social isolation is a growing modern phenomenon. So again, we see loneliness and social isolation being mixed up. Modern life is lonely, we all need someone to help in The Guardian. Is modern life making us lonely? BBC News. Or why you feel so lonely, from tribalism to individualism and back again. And indeed, social isolation is a risk factor for loneliness that is more common in more individualistic cultures. But research typically finds that loneliness is not really higher in more individualistic cultures. In fact, many research studies find that people in more collectivistic cultures report more loneliness than in individualistic cultures. And why would that be? There might be other risk factors for loneliness that would be more common in more collectivistic cultures. For instance, in such cultures, people tend to be more loyal to their family relationships, hold on to them more. So if people are unlucky and are born into low-quality family relationships, they can be trapped in relationships that keep triggering loneliness. Also, social norms can be narrower and also stricter, meaning that they elicit more social sanctions. And when I say narrower, just think, for instance, of these unwritten rules that you ought to, for instance, be heterosexual, get married, have children, have a partner that your family approves of. So a lot of different norms, and as soon as we deviate from social norms, we are more likely to be socially rejected by others, and we will also more often feel disconnected from others because they do not really understand us. So those are all risk factors for more loneliness. Also, people in cultures where people spend much time together with others might be more sensitive to social isolation or spending much time alone. So the same level of social isolation or aloneness might trigger more loneliness for people in more collectivistic cultures than for people in more individualistic cultures. Last misunderstanding I want to address is that loneliness has massively increased over the last years. You will see that in a lot of media articles, and it has also been in the introduction of this talk. From a scientific perspective, I can just say we don't know. Why? Because there are not many studies that have actually studied loneliness over time, for instance, in longitudinal studies over multiple decades. There are some estimations that took individual study findings that sometimes find a slight increase, sometimes a slight decrease, but overall we can say that findings are quite mixed, so there is definitely not a scientific basis to really conclude that loneliness would have massively increased in the last years, even though, again, social isolation probably has. To bring things full circle, I would like to return to the beginning of this talk when I invited you to think of a situation in which you felt lonely. Maybe now you think, okay, so what do we then do if we feel lonely? You have now told us all the things that loneliness is not, but what can you tell us about what we need to do when we feel lonely then, or what loneliness is? Maybe what you can take away from this talk is that loneliness experiences are very diverse. So if you feel lonely, or if someone around you feels lonely, it is often very important to first think about the why. So to first try to identify the cause for a specific person's loneliness, and then you can address the cause for that person's loneliness. Some people might say, yeah, I do actually feel lonely because I do not have enough social relationships. And if you do not have enough social relationships, well, then you might want to join an activity, for instance, to get to know more people in a casual way. But for many people, it might be that their loneliness dates back to their childhood when they maybe had some troubled family relationships that also affect how they view and act in relationships nowadays. So then a psychotherapy might actually be more useful. Or other people might feel lonely because they are part of a marginalized group. So they might quite often be socially rejected or also discriminated against. In that case, support groups might be helpful, and of course also societal interventions. I think that there are also quite some loneliness causes that can just not be immediately erased. For instance, you can't erase a breakup, you can't erase a person passing away. In those cases, it might be quite helpful to accept that you feel lonely for a while, because that's a very normal reaction. Loneliness is a very normal reaction to such life events, and often just understanding that and accepting it rather than judging oneself for this loneliness can already ease the loneliness a little. But of course, you can also distract yourself a little from the loneliness in those situations, for instance, through engaging with work, hobbies, but also art, and that's something I would like to stress particularly tonight, because art is often not only a way of getting distracted, but it can also help you relate to other people's experiences without necessarily having to engage in an active conversation. And often understanding that you're not alone with your personal experience already eases your loneliness. And with that, I would like to thank you and invite you to explore all the art at this festival tonight. Thank you.